What's the downside of having a career in academia? Stick around and find out the 5 major drawbacks today in this episode of Navigating Academia. What's up, everybody? My name is Dr. J. Phoenix Singh, and I want to warmly welcome you to this episode of Navigating Academia, your leading source for guidance on how to be able to advance your career in academia. Now, as always, I appreciate the love, so please do take a second to be able to like this video, to share it with your friends, your colleagues, your students, subscribe to our channel, hit that bell to be able to make sure you get notifications for any time that we upload new content, and at the same time, consider commenting below because we'd love to hear from you. You can also follow us at these social media accounts. So let's jump right in. Today we're going to be discussing the downsides of a career in academia. Maybe when you were growing up, you had dreams of being called professor, you ended up with this image in your mind of standing in front of dozens if not hundreds of students lecturing, you imagined having a blazer with the little, elbow pads, whatever it is, this was the dream. But just like with any other dream, the expectations and the reality can be two pretty different things. Now, there are a lot of benefits to being an academic, to having a career in academia, and I've made a complimentary video to this one that discusses those, and I'll link that down in the description below. But today I really want to focus on 5 of the biggest drawbacks to this kind of a career that maybe you haven't taken into consideration yet if you're thinking, is academia for me or is it not? Now, these are not reasons to abandon your professional premonitions that this is what you want to do, but it is something where I'm hoping to be able to inform your decision-making process on, because these are some things that, I didn't really think about before taking the plunge. It ended up being something that, of course, I was very passionate about, but these were some things that I think would be helpful to have known before really diving into that deep end. So, let's do it. Downside number 1 is finding a tenure-track position. Over half of all new PhDs face unemployment, and that's across the board. That's not only if you're entering academia, this is for new PhDs. If you want to go into an industry-related job, it's the same thing. A lot of people think, I'm going to get my PhD and it's going to be really easy to be able to lock down, the job that I've always wanted. But that's really not the case. And if that's the only reason why you're doing a doctorate, that's something where you should really, kind of think again. Also, less than 1/3 of all current academic positions in the United States, at least, are tenure-track positions. Now, this is compared to over 80% back in 1969. So it's just wild, the difference between now and then. So as you can imagine, with so few jobs being out there, the competition is fierce. And it's something where tenure itself means a lot less than it used to. A lot of people see tenure as job security and as the ability to essentially do anything, some people believe, and keep your job. And that's simply not the case. In many cases, universities are bureaucracies, and just because the concept of tenure is that, you can do some pretty extreme things in terms of, research lines that you may want to get into, that, the university, it's not something that usually your department's engaged in. So let's say you're in a forensic psychology department and you want to be doing things in kind of a different area of forensic psychology than everybody else, start your own lab, your own research team, these sorts of things. You may feel more comfortable doing that after you've got tenure relative to before when you're just, let's say, an assistant professor. But you have to keep in mind that tenure these days is something where if you do something really wrong, they're going to find a way to get you out. A lot of people think, again, that's job security, but I was at a university for my postdoctoral fellowship where there was a professor who was doing, some research and speaking out against the university and giving people a really hard time, refusing to leave after, innumerable warnings. And he was a tenured professor, and they ended up kicking him out. They ended up finding a way to get him fired. Then there was all these lawsuits, and it was really ugly and the whole thing. But that's just something to keep in mind. It's just that title of tenure isn't something where it means that you can't be touched. And finally, it's not just finding a tenure track position, it's finding a tenure track position at a school that you actually want to work at. So actually getting a position that has tenure as a possibility at your dream university is even more unlikely. And this is something that you need to kind of know going in. It's not that, your dream university is, let's say Harvard, and you say, I want to be a Harvard professor, and then, you graduate with your PhD, and you just assume that you're going to get this kind of a position, right? It's really quite cutthroat. Downside number 2 is making a living. This is the financial aspect here. So there's really limited opportunities for upward mobility relative to industry. So in industry, for example, you can start at the bellboy in a hotel, for example, and you can work all your way up to manager. You can open your own hotel chain, whatever it happens to be. There's unlimited opportunities for upwards mobility versus if you're in a standard tenure track position, at least in the United States, where you're a graduate student, you're a postdoctoral fellow, assistant, associate, full professor, unless you want to get into administration and become a provost or a dean or whatever it happens to be, in that main line of work, you have a cap on what you're going to be able to make. Now, maybe something where, you're in a field that deals with grants, or, you open a center which is affiliated with the university or is actually through the university, and you get ancillary funding for that to be able to make more money. Maybe you have side hustles. I have a whole separate video on the best side hustles for academics. I'm going to link that down in the description below for you guys to be able to check out. This is very important to take into consideration because obviously, yourself and your family's well-being is at stake here, and the average salary, according to 2017 Bureau of Labor Statistic numbers here in the United States, of psychology professors across the board, across assistant, associate, full, is $77,000. And this takes into consideration positions which are, really high up in terms of, R1 universities where, you're making 6 figures, and it goes all the way to kind of private, smaller name universities as well. And sometimes if you have a private, smaller name university, you can make even more than you can at other places. It really is something where it's a crapshoot, and you need to find the right opportunity for yourself. But this is definitely a major drawback. $77,000 may seem like a lot, but keep in mind that other than adjusting for inflation, the likelihood that after you get to that top level full professor, you're just going to keep getting, major incremental promotions, it's just really not there. So it's one of the reasons also to be able to really negotiate your starting salary when you get into academia, because in many cases, it's also going to determine your ending salary, at least for, your teaching and, basic jobs if you're not a research professor or if you don't do grants, etc. The final consideration is the rise of adjuncting. So bringing in adjunct professors to be able to teach courses. It is so much less expensive to be able to have an adjunct. The average adjunct hourly salary in the United States right now is $38 an hour. Now, if you've taught courses before, you know the ridiculous amount of time that it takes to, get your content, prep the courses, teach the courses, grade the papers, and these sorts of things. It is an absurd amount to be paid to be able to adjunct relative to the amount of time that you're putting in. And sure, after a while, you've got the course content, you just got to go in there and do it. Sure, some people, their passion is teaching to the extent that they would do it for free. And it's just really nice to have the money. And if that's you, that's awesome. I think that's great. But in terms of just this idea of making a ton of money, you're not going to be able to do it only adjuncting. Downside number 3 is having to deal with bureaucracy. Dealing with everybody from department chairs to deans to departmental and university committees to institutional review boards that are at your university. Oh my gosh, it can be so much red tape to be able to deal with that it can be brutal. Having to go through the proper avenues to get things done can take forever relative to doing the same work in something like an industry position. And you need to take that into consideration because academia, when you get into it, you are going to be navigating a very unique set of politics that you wouldn't have to navigate in the same way in other career fields. Same thing with having to get annual reports, having your performance evaluated not only by your superiors and your colleagues, but by students as well. You have to take that into consideration. You know, there's websites like, I think it's ratemyprofessor.com, where essentially people are going to go on there and they're going to talk about you. You know, you need to be ready for that. Be ready for the trolls. People usually only post on these sites like Yelp, for example, as well, only if, you know, they had a really good experience or a really awful experience with you. So you need to be, you know, you need to be open to seeing both of those things from former students, and that can be brutal sometimes. And also just developing things like rubrics and curriculum, these things, and having those things reviewed, the bureaucracy behind that can be really killer to a lot of people. And keep in mind that you've also got things like office politics, and this can really limit your free speech and independence, regardless of having something like the tenure label, which, like I said, you know, means a lot less than it used to. You know, you can't just run around saying whatever you want, even if you've got this research independence, right? It's very important to understand that, because again, I do run into a lot of people, which is why I really press the point home, who believe that, you know, having tenure means that you're this invincible person who can do no wrong. So that's downside number 3. Downside number 4 is a big one that usually people don't think about, and this is cliques. So social cliques. Some people call them cliques, right? And there's usually a few key universities or a few key programs in whatever your field is in your country, let alone in the world. Sometimes there's only a few kind of key places. But usually at those locations, you have a few key professors who are leaders in the field. Now, the people that were their supervisors, you know, their mentors, people who've helped them in the past, and people that they went through their own graduate school or postdoctoral experiences with, they've got tight bonds with those people, and they stick with those people. And so because of that, them and any graduate students of theirs become basically, some people would say indoctrinated, that's the wrong word, but incorporated, I would say, into this clique. And these cliques are transgenerational, because then those students, they end up having students of their own, so on and so forth. And in many cases, these guys could be loyal, sometimes blindly loyal, to the institution they graduated from their supervisor, from their fellow graduate students who they went through the program with. And think about it, right? It's mirror exposure effect. The more you're exposed to something, the more that you like it. So it feels a lot safer to be in one of these cliques with, you know, people that you know or things that you're comfortable with. And obviously some academics, they bounce around university to university. So maybe if somebody was in your department, you got to know them, you had some beers, you like them, whatever it is. They go to another university, they have students, they start working with people in their department. All of a sudden, you're working with that same person and their colleagues, and all of a sudden their colleagues get inducted, as it were, into this clique. Now, the issue is that these cliques can really hold inordinate power because of two things. Number one is their role on editorial boards. So when it comes to journals, a lot of people in the community think that journals and peer-reviewed research is inherently objective, and it's definitely not. It's definitely a game. And a lot of it is a social game. There are a number of journals in any field who will have their editorial board, let alone the associate editors or the editor, who are part of very distinct cliques. And because of that, individuals who are also in the clique are going to have a better chance of getting published in those journals. And anybody who opposes that clique, either because their ideologies conflict or just somebody doesn't like somebody else, you know, these things can get really petty in academia. I've run up against it myself. And when those things happen, you just need to be kind of prepared. I'll make another video on what I consider to be the number one key to success in academia, which essentially has to do with making a decision as to whether or not to play this politics game with the cliques or whether or not to kind of strike out on your own. And so I think that that's a really important thing to take into consideration, because not only can these guys kind of, the currency of academia is publications and grants in many ways. And if these guys have been there forever before you came in, they already have these power positions, obviously it can be harder to get your hands on some of that currency if you don't play the game. But also in terms of associations, professional associations who may run these journals or run book series or, you know, have different kinds of power in terms of, you know, approving or rejecting conference proposals, etc. You know, these guys, you know, in these different cliques, they usually dominate these. For example, in terms of, you know, student groups within an association, usually it's all the students of a few of these, you know, major clique folks. And usually they have a lot of students collectively. So it's important to understand this kind of unspoken role of cliques in academia, which again is something people don't really talk about. So that's downside number 4. And downside number 5 is the illusion of flexibility. And what I mean here is that flexibility as an academic is something that a lot of people talk about. They say, this is great, you can set your own hours unless you have to be in the department for a meeting or a class or whatever it is. You can work from anywhere sometimes, depends on kind of what your given department is like, what your department chair, vice chair, kind of what they're looking for out of you. But, just because you can be flexible doesn't necessarily mean you can do anything you want whenever you want. In fact, it can often just mean that your hours never stop. Even when you're not in the office, you're already always thinking about these things because there's so many loose ends in academia. You'll have all these papers you're working on at the same time. Maybe you got a book project. Maybe you got some grants. Maybe, you need to do some peer reviewing. You serve on these committees. You've got all of these different things at the same time. You have to juggle all of those simultaneously. Oh my gosh, that's really hard. So your mind is always going to be running a million miles a minute unless you can find a way to be really mindful, to be able to kind of stop yourself and enjoy life, which, trust me, is extremely difficult, especially if you're trying to rise up in academia. So even if you're in a 9-month position, so you're teaching during the regular school year, and then there's this perception that you get the summers off. Summers are off just like when you were in college, right? Summers are gone. But the thing is this, that you're still gonna have a ton of prep work to do, right? You're gonna need to catch up on publications. Maybe you've got some book projects or some grant applications that you wanna write. You have, again, so many responsibilities and things you need to take care of that, thank goodness, you're getting some breath from the regular school year, but that doesn't mean that you're, coming up for fresh air to be able to walk out onto the beach and lay there with a margarita. No, you're still treading water during those months. And sometimes in those off months, if you're in a 9-month position, you're not getting paid, but you're doing an absurd amount of prep work, preparing new curricula, working on, course materials, PowerPoints, handouts, tests, whatever it is, but you're not getting paid for it. So you need to take that into consideration. All right, y'all, thank you so much for watching this episode. I want to hear from you in the comments below. What do you think the biggest downside of a career in academia is? I want to hear from you. Also, per usual, if there's anything in particular, any topic, any question that you have, please do post it below if you want to see us do an episode on it. And we'll certainly take it into consideration to be able to do something because you guys are the #1 priority. The reason for this series is for you. Don't forget to like and share this video with your colleagues, with your friends, with your students, subscribe to our channel, and follow us on social media. If you're interested in one-on-one career mentoring, deciding whether or not academia is for you, or how to be able to navigate the cliques and the bureaucracies and all these different pieces and reestablish work-life balance, which is so hard, I want you to set up a one-on-one consultation call via the website below. Just book an hour for us to talk, and let's discuss whether or not some coaching would be able to help you to get through these challenges and get yourself back to a point where you're really feeling comfortable with things. You've got that positive momentum again, and to be able to have somebody who can be your personal cheerleader in terms of your career. Signing off, everyone. Have a great day, and don't forget to get out there, take chances, and be your best self. Thank you so much for stopping by, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here as always. If you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more in this series on navigating academia, please click on one of these links over here to be able to view more original content. I hope to see you there.